Well, Razorback fans, Jordan Walsh makes his announcement and his decision official. So let's go ahead and talk about that as well as some other transfer portal updates here on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast.
You are Locked On Razorbacks, your daily podcast on the Arkansas Razorbacks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into Locked On Razorbacks podcast. I am your host, John Nabors. I am also the host of Out of Bounds. You can catch every weekday afternoon from 1 to 4 on 103.7 The Buzz and 103.7thebuzz.com. Hope everybody's having a wonderful Thursday, as there was some pretty big news going on once again in the transfer portal, which, man, yesterday's podcast blew up, and it was incredible to see how many people were watching it and reacting to it and listening to it and all that. So I appreciate each and every one of you. And so if this is your first time checking in on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast, be sure to subscribe on YouTube and hit that like button, and hit the notification bell, all the stuff that the YouTubers say for you to do. But I appreciate each and every one of you. And we're going to continue it on and keep moving with some other news about Arkansas Razorback basketball, because this is what people want to hear about. This is what they want to talk about. So let's keep it moving. As Jordan Walsh, the Razorback forward, who was a freshman All-American coming out of high school, officially made it known to hogsports.com, and Curtis Wilkerson, who does a great job of covering all things basketball and has come on this podcast numerous times, did the reporting and did a sit-down interview with Jordan Walsh as he officially announced that he will be going pro, but retaining his eligibility for next season. So essentially what that means is that he has decided to test the NBA waters, and if it doesn't work out, or if he has a change of heart, or he doesn't hear what he wants to hear, he is set up to where he can come back for another year at Arkansas. Just a few of the quotes, and again, check it out at hogsports.com. They did a great job of it. But Jordan Walsh says, quote, "Just like playing in March Madness, this is another big dream I've had. I want to thank God for helping me get where I am today. My parents, who have always been there for me and always looked out and made sure that I was able to get to these practices and workouts. They've traveled to every single game so they can cheer me on personally every time. I want to thank them because without them, none of this would be possible. With that being said, I am declaring for the NBA draft, but I will be still maintaining my college eligibility." Again, if you've watched the podcast or listened to the podcast, you'll know that this wasn't necessarily a huge shock. I kind of felt like after time, Walsh was going to be leaning towards this, and kind of just looking at some of the things that have been put out and, his little cryptic video that he released. It just seemed like this was the direction that he was going to be going. And I know that he still says that he's going to be retaining his college eligibility, which I believe is true. But if I'm just going off of what my gut feeling, as I like to do here on the podcast, I think that Jordan Walsh will move on. I think Jordan Walsh will go pro. I'm not saying he'll get drafted for sure, but I do believe that there'll be plenty of opportunities for him to take it to that next level, because he's basically doing what Devo Davis is doing, where they're going pro, testing the waters, but still leaving it open for them to come back. Now, this is just my gut feeling. I think both of them might be gone, and the likelihood of one of them coming back is pretty low. That's just my opinion, But taking it to another step, and why I believe that may more so be the case, is I started wondering about, this transfer portal and what Muss has been doing and what the staff has been doing and how they've been approaching it. And we know that it's been hot and heavy over the past few weeks, ever since it opened, and Arkansas just adding some players into the mix. And knowing that, and knowing the type of big names that Arkansas is going after, and some of the ones that may still be in the running, I have a hard time believing that Muss and the staff are just going to say, okay, well, we're going to fill up all of our scholarship spots but 2, and then we're just going to wait for a few months until Walsh and Devo decide what they're going to end up doing. And then if they decide that they're going to move on, we'll just have to find somebody else then. I don't see that being the case. Like, think about it just logically. Do you think Eric Musselman and the staff are going to be fine just sitting back and not knowing one way or the other if a player is going to be here next year or not? And they're just going to be fine, going through the next few months with 2 open scholarships when there's so many players that are in the portal, guys that they really would love to have, and they're just going to say no to those players that they would like to recruit because they're waiting on Walsh and Devo? I could be wrong, but I just don't see that actually happening. I don't see that being a thing. I just feel like Muss is going to say, all right, well, I'm going to treat it as you two are gone and I'm going to build my roster, assuming that's the case. Maybe they could find some way to make it work. Maybe they have some sort of backup plan for if one of them or both of them decided to come back. But that's just the vibe that I get. I get that, hey, we're going to treat this as y'all are gone and we're going to move forward. Kind of gives the same vibes if you think about it last year with Jalen Williams. You know, he entered into the NBA draft while also retaining his eligibility. And maybe it was something that he got told where he's like, hey, you're going to get drafted this year. But I think also a big part of it was just like, hey, okay, if you do this, we're going to treat you as you're moving on. And we're going to try to go and get guys to replace you. It's probably going to be the same thing here. So I would be really surprised if Devo and Walsh come back. Just being honest. I'm not saying I don't want them back because I think both of them would be great additions. And we know what, especially Devo and what he's done and how he's gotten better and better each year and the leadership that he provides. And we know Walsh with those raw athletic ability and, you know, just such a versatile player. He could be able to develop into something. But just the likelihood of getting them both back is very, very low. I would prefer Devo, and that's nothing against Jordan Walsh. I would prefer Devo just because we know that veteran leadership means so much and he understands what Muss demands of him. So, but I'd take either of them. But I think they're going to be moving on. I think they're going to be looking for other players to get out of the portal. We know they've been very guard heavy. Guys are going to be fighting for minutes there too. So I just think that this is going to be something to where Walsh says, appreciate it, moving on. And let's see what some of the other players that get added into the mix too. And speaking specifically about Jordan Walsh, I'll always be very appreciative of all the players this past year and what they were able to do and what they were able to provide. But Jordan Walsh, thinking about what he had to go through in the beginning of the year where he just wasn't clicking in. Like you could tell there was something there, but he couldn't stay on the court because he just fouled. He fouled all the time. And that would really cost him at staying in the games and getting any sort of rhythm because you'd look up and the guy would play 10 minutes and have 4 fouls. Once he settled in and got the hang of how to be aggressive, but not too aggressive, you saw the type of player that he could be, especially defensively. When Arkansas beat Kansas in the NCAA tournament, not only did he hit that big three to give Arkansas the lead and made some big plays, but it was his defense that ended up just shutting down Kansas because of his length and his athleticism. You saw it, and it's almost like, man, I'd love to see where that could go after another year. How his offensive game could develop, how we can continue to get better as a defensive player. I would love to see that, but I also understand that you want to check it out and see what it's about. You were a McDonald's All-American. You are a 5-star player. I don't know if you're going to get drafted. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm some guru when it comes to the NBA draft, but I'm sure that there are going to be options for you, whatever you end up doing. So I appreciate Jordan Walsh. I appreciate the time he put in, and I appreciate what he did for Arkansas and the great teammate that he was. He was a great interview too. Like anytime that you ever talked to him, he was always very, very nice, very talkative, very energized. And so wish him nothing but the best of luck. And hopefully he figures out what he wants. But he had a great family too. And I just really love what he did for Arkansas in the short period of time that he was here. So, but again, if it ends up being crazy and I could be completely wrong, which has happened before, he ends up coming back for another year, I will welcome him with open arms. I will absolutely be all about Jordan Walsh coming back. But we're going to have to cross that bridge once we get there. Folks, I got to tell you, something exciting is happening with Built.com on April 22nd. It's around the corner. Don't have all the details yet, but the excitement is real, and it's something you won't want to miss. It's if you know how Built works, they have the most incredible protein bars in the world, and they have these amazing flavor drops that they do with unreal flavors in limited quantity. So mark your calendars and head to Built.com on Saturday, April 22nd, to be the first to discover what the hype is all about. Can't wait to see what the new flavor is because they always have great ones whenever they add them to the mix. And be sure to use promo code LOCKEDON15 and you'll get 15% off your next order at Built.com.
You are Locked On Razorbacks, your daily podcast on the Arkansas Razorbacks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, moving on into the next segment of the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. As you all know, I've been recording these podcasts the day before. And so if the news could break at any point in time and I would be behind the curve or whatever for the podcast itself. So just bear with me because there could be something to by the time on Thursday you listen or watch this podcast, some big time story would have happened or some big breaking news. So just keep that in mind. But I will say that a question that I have gotten thrown at me so much, and I think it's a very interesting one because I've talked about it mainly on my radio show. And I think I alluded to it a little bit yesterday, but it's about what is better for a program in college basketball? Is it about high school recruiting, or is it about portal recruiting, or is it about both? Now, everybody that will, if you ask that question to, will give you a cop-out, cliche answer. Well, it's a little bit of both. Like, yeah, duh. Of course, you can't have an entire team of nothing but transfers, and you can't have a team that's nothing but high school players. Like, you got to have a mix. It's just obvious of that's how it works in college basketball. But I'm talking about which of them all, though, between them all, are the most important. If you're talking about building a program, a championship-winning program, do you really go hot and heavy at the high level, high school recruiting, or do you go hot and heavy into the transfer portal? Now, we would love to sit here and say all the time that, man, I would love to have a player develop, be at a program for 2 to 3 years, like a Devo Davis, and really build that into something. And I think everybody would. I think Muss would honestly love that. But when it comes to year by year making your team as good as it possibly can be, you have to take a lot of things into consideration. And if you have a project or a freshman player that was highly recruited coming out of high school and he's still developing and you don't really know what turn it's going to take the next season, or you have a transfer that's in the portal that you know you could get right now and be immediately better right now and be able to provide so much more right now, you start weighing those options and it becomes a lot more difficult than we even realize. Because then you throw into the mix of, okay, well, I'm going to bring in this freshman, and if he's not fully ready to go, or if he's not where the rest of the guys are at who are already on the team, guess what he's going to do? He's not getting the playing time and getting the love. He's going to transfer out anyways. So you're having to go through this whole balancing act of trying to figure out what is the best way of doing this. How do you find a way to develop players out of high school, but also getting them out of transfer portal and keeping them at your school? And then how do you go about where if your player's not that you thought was going to be coming along a little bit more, he's not coming along. So then how do you handle the next step? There's just so much balancing that comes into it. And what it comes down to eventually is that you just need to kind of throw up your arms and say, you know what? It doesn't matter. I'm going to trust the coaching staff. Whatever they feel it is best, especially when the results come along with winning, I'm going to go with that. And when it comes to portal and high school players, just given the current circumstances, I really, really want transfer players more so now than I think I do high school players. Now, some of you will disagree with me on that. Anthony Black was awesome. That dude was great. Incredible player. We did a whole podcast on him. True freshman. And then Nick Smith with all the injuries and stuff, it was tough for him to get going. And then with Walsh, as we just talked about with him, he was great, but he still was a freshman. You make freshman mistakes. It takes you a little bit longer to come along, but you have so much upside. And then you throw into the mix of the other 3 freshmen that were on the bench with Dunning and Forward and Pinion, and Dunning's already hit the portal. That just doesn't really make for anything that you need help with in the immediate. Like, you don't have that. And so, unless people are contributing as true freshmen, like what Devo Davis did, like what Jalen Williams did, Moses Moody, those guys were big contributors as freshmen. Unless you have that, it's not really going to work out for you because those players are either going to transfer out or you're going to see somebody better. But with transfers themselves, when you bring them in, you already know that, hey, these guys can play high-level college basketball. Like, that's what Arkansas has been doing. They're bringing in guys that have proven in major conferences and against major competition that they can play at the highest level in college basketball. So you don't have to worry about, are they ready? You don't have to worry about, are they good to go? You see how you've gotten already an indication. You've gotten a little bit of a taste of what they can do in major college basketball. And you say, you know what? I can take this player and make him even better. They got the foundation laid, and I don't have to go through the freshman mistakes and the freshman stuff that I have to deal with all the time when it comes to the mistakes they make, fouling too much, being too raw, not understanding how the game works, the work in progress that you have to go through, you can literally just bring them in and be like, okay, you got a great foundation because we've seen you. Now let's just do these little tweaks here and there and train her into a big time player. That's essentially what the transfer portal is. And that's why I think I'm starting to enjoy it a lot more. Under Muss, he's had so many great transfers. Some haven't panned out big time, but each and every year, you can make the argument that the transfers were the difference makers, as we've already talked about. And I want that. I want difference makers to be immediate. I want them to be guys that the second they step on campus, they're ready to roll. But then everyone starts, oh, continuity. Okay, yes, I get that. But at the same time, where's the continuity if the player wants to leave because he's not getting playing time? Are you just going to play him just for the sake of him not leaving, even though he's not ready? No. And I feel like that was the case with Dunning and Ford and Pinion, and it's nothing against those players. But as freshmen, they just weren't ready for this. They weren't ready for Arkansas, and that's why they didn't play. They weren't to the level that Muss needed his players to be at, so you don't play. But should he have played them anyways to keep them from transferring out or possibly transferring out? No, I don't think so. Play the best players out there that's going to give you the best chance of winning. The portal is where it's at now. It's become the new high school recruiting, where honestly, in college basketball at least, that's where the championships are made, at least at a place like Arkansas. Now, if this weekend goes really well and the next few days go really well for Arkansas basketball, maybe you'll really start to see the big time results of who's going to be coming in next year and how much of an impact that they will make. We will see. But I believe that the portal is the right move, and I believe it's the right direction, and I have zero problem with Eric Musselman and doing it and handling it the way that he is. I just want to win. I don't care how much you make in NIL. I don't care what your transfer portal situation was. I don't care what number you wear. I don't care how your hair looks. I don't care about any of that stuff. I care about winning. And if the transfer portal is what brings in wins, so be it. But if it doesn't, let's have a talk about it. But right now, I like the direction that it's going. We're getting to the final segment, and one that I really don't want to talk about, but I feel like we have to. Dealing with football, Razorback football, on the other side of the break here on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast, so stay with us.
You are Locked On Razorbacks, your daily podcast on the Arkansas Razorbacks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, so final segment here on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast. Man, I'm sure a lot of you saw that Razorback football got ripped on social media by Barstool Sports, by Outkick the Coverage, by anybody who's one of those websites and blogs because of the fact that they were showing off their Liberty Bowl rings as some sort of like big production via social media. If you haven't seen the video, I'll play the video for you with the music and everything. Hopefully I don't get copyrighted or anything, but just check out the video for yourself and you can make your own judgment assessment.
Looking deep, got a man wide open at the 20-yard line, complete, touchdown Arkansas. Going down the middle, got his tight end wide open, touchdown Arkansas. Right side, Green, got a block, inside the 10 to the 5, touchdown Arkansas. Jefferson can throw, Banks, got a man, touchdown. They're going to run a reverse. They're looking to make it a reverse pass. They throw it. Incomplete. Arkansas wins. The Razorbacks win the ball game. 55-53 the final. Arkansas wins the Liberty Bowl.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that was it. Listen, let me just say this. Those are actually really good-looking rings. I'm not a big ring guy, in general, unless it's like a national championship ring, but it's at least a good-looking ring. I'll say that. But yeah, I get why people were ripping Arkansas just because, if you want to do a ring ceremony type thing and you do it within your locker room or within the player celebration, like that's fine. I get it. You want to be proud of all your wins. But when you put out this highly produced video of look what we accomplished by winning the Liberty Bowl and beating a Kansas team that wasn't very good and going 7-6, I'm not a fan of that. Social media is a cesspool, and it is something that they will rip you and they will tear you apart to pieces for whatever they possibly can. And so when you put out a video like this, it's like, you got to read the room, you know? Don't do that. Because I'm the one that ripped Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri for lighting up a cigar when he beat Arkansas this past season, going 6-6. I'm like, you're a dork, and that's lame. And I kind of feel like this is lame too. So, just my opinion. I love you, Razorbacks, and I love you on the social media team and the marketing team. And if you want to celebrate it, great. But you got to expect something like that was going to get ripped for good reason. That's all I'm saying. It's pretty nasty, pretty gross, but don't do that again, please. Like, when you won the Outback Bowl, that was great. Like, yeah, go off of that because the season was viewed as a high success. But I don't think this past year you could say it was a high success. A little bit of a success, but not a high success, at least. But you don't care what I think. That's just what I believe, at least here on this podcast. So, anyways, appreciate everybody listening in to Locked On Razorbacks podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or on Google Play. You can also get after me on Twitter, BuzzJohnNabors, for any questions, comments, concerns that you may have. Keep it going from there. Same podcast time, same podcast channel tomorrow afternoon. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you then.